For learning a second language, there can be two possibilities. An individual can learn a second language through informal exposure. For example, when an individual immigrates to an English-speaking country and hears English around him or her all the time and learns it. The second possibility is learning English or any language, any second language, through formal instruction. The formal instruction, this possibility of learning English through formal instruction is highly relevant to World English's paradigm. According to orthodox view of second language acquisition, the ultimate aim or the ultimate goal for learning any second language is the attainment of native speaker proficiency or native-like proficiency. And any deviation from native speaker norms are treated as errors, and it is believed that if a person makes errors, it is an indication of their incompetence, their linguistic incompetence, or their lack of capability to attain native-like competence. Whereas in World Englishes, the view of learning a second language is very different. In the World Englishes context, learning an L2 does not have the attainment of the native speaker proficiency as its ultimate goal. And any deviations from standard English or the norms of standard English, they may not be considered as errors. They may not be errors, in fact, especially when an error is used systematically and it emerges in the language of an entire speech community. So a peculiar use of English and idiosyncratic use of English, very individual use of language, when it is shared by an entire community, it is not considered an error any longer. For example, in Pakistani context, in the context of Pakistani or Indian English, an example can be the use of general question tag. For example, you like cricket, isn't it? So instead of saying don't you, Pakistani and Indian speakers of English use this general question tag. You watched a film last night, isn't it? So instead of saying didn't you. Similarly, in Pakistani and Indian English and other Englishes of outer and expanding circle, we see the pluralization of uncountable nouns, for example, equipments, furnitures. It is used so commonly and shared by almost the entire speech community that we see such uses even in published form in outer and expanding circle countries. So when an error appears systematically and is shared by an entire community, it is no longer viewed as an error but a feature of the English of that particular region. When we talk about language instruction in the context of World Englishes, we must not forget that in outer and expanding circle countries, in majority of these countries, instruction is carried out not by native English speaker teachers but non-native English speaking teachers, local teachers, and therefore the learners do not get a chance to learn English or to hear or use English with the help of native English teachers. Similarly, they do not have exposure to native English even outside the class because in many cases the use of English is limited and is not, of course, as wide as it may be in a native English speaking countries. In some cases, the exposure is limited even in terms of the teaching learning materials. They may have access only to a textbook which is in English, and they may find it very difficult to find teaching materials, more extensive teaching material in English. So, considering these facts, that the exposure of learners when they're learning a second language, when they're in the context of world Englishes, when they're learning English as a second language, the exposure to native speakers is limited, and the functions for which English is used in these countries is also very different from the functions English may be used in native English speaking countries. Therefore, we need to evaluate or judge the proficiency, evaluate the proficiency of the learners in the light of the needs and the facts of language instruction in these countries in the outer and expanding circle.